My wife betrayed me. I found out about it through a DNA test, so I started a live stream and filmed my wife cheating on me with her boss. It was a late Friday night, and I was in my office reviewing profiles of several candidates who had applied for a job opening at our company. As the regional manager for a chemical company specializing in weed control, fertilizer, and water retention products, my role was vital. Our survival depended on the farmers who grew our food, and we prided ourselves on being the first company recognized for 100% environmentally friendly products. Two of my office staff's husbands had recently been promoted, resulting in their resignations. Both families were relocating within the next 3 months, so we needed to fill their positions promptly. Our sales department covered 8 states in the Midwest, often dismissed as flyover country, and this year's sales growth had surpassed expectations. Emily, my executive assistant, peeked into my office and said, "All 8 candidates have confirmed their interview times for Monday. I'm off now, so good night." Every Thursday, I traveled to one of the states in my region for a half-day sales meeting on Friday before heading home. This routine had turned Thursday evenings into my wife's night out with her friends, an arrangement worth the cost of a babysitter. My weekly visits were vital for providing our sales reps with the personal contact they needed, and over the years, it had paid off handsomely. I hadn't lost a single team member in 8 years, which was quite an achievement for the company. After returning from my trip today, I had some time to review a few cases before heading home. The company had been urging me to give up this part of my job for years, but I valued the solitude it provided. With a know-it-all wife and 3 kids, the quiet time driving was invaluable. It also saved our branch from having to hire a sales manager, a necessary consideration in a budget-conscious environment. Our children were in junior and senior high school. My eldest daughter, my pride and joy, was graduating in the fall and had been awarded a full scholarship to Southeast Missouri State University. My youngest daughter had just turned 16 and was busy studying for her GED. My wife, Alice, had been working as an executive assistant district attorney since the year before our youngest was born. She had recently been offered a new position as a lawyer in the federal government, which she accepted. The federal job seemed to appreciate her uncompromising hardball approach, and the pay was double her current salary. It would have been foolish to turn it down, and she was set to start in 4 months. Despite being around my age, she had never remarried, and although rumors swirled, I didn't believe she was gay. For the past 15 years, my parents had taken our 3 children every second weekend of the month, giving my wife and me some much-needed time alone. My parents felt we needed this break to reconnect, and I have to admit it was the greatest gift they could have given us. Without it, we might have ended up divorced like so many others. Our eldest, Grace, was set to work in our senator's office in Washington, D.C. for the summer before starting her undergraduate degree in political science. Some time ago, my father, with my permission, bought each of our 3 children a kit from Ancestry and submitted their DNA for testing. We knew a match would only be possible if any of their relatives had also submitted their DNA. When the kids talked to me about it, I gave my approval, thinking it might open up a new adventure for us. Grace decided to surprise their mother with the results, which we knew could take 5 or 6 months to arrive. This weekend, we were headed to Nashville to visit the Grand Ole Opry, returning home on Sunday. My wife had planned this special trip to create another memory in our life's journey. I met Alice in my final year of university at a soccer match. No, I wasn't one of the players. I was one of the non-aim grunts selling overpriced food to the spectators. She was the coach's daughter and always had free tickets. One day she had an argument with her boyfriend, and somehow I found myself in the middle of their scuffle. She pushed him, and he retaliated by shoving me down the concrete stairs. I ended up in the hospital with 25 stitches on my forehead. Alice must have felt guilty because she visited me every day to check on me. She met my whole family before I even regained full consciousness. They told me later that I had been in a coma for nearly a week due to severe internal injuries. As the haze in my vision started to clear, I saw a strikingly beautiful woman standing by my bed. For a moment, I thought I had died and was at the pearly gates with her as my angel guide. Then my friend Rebecca appeared beside her, looking less than impressed. I shut my eyes, hoping that when I opened them, Rebecca would be gone and this surreal scene would have vanished. When I woke again, the goddess-like figure was still there, but Rebecca was nowhere to be seen. It turned out she had found someone else to bother. Alice, the woman who had been by my side, never asked for anything in return. As I slowly pieced my life back together, we eventually started dating without much fanfare. After graduation, I went into sales and she landed her first job as a management assistant. During a family reunion, her younger cousin asked why she was still single, and she replied, "Because James hasn't proposed to me yet." 3 months later, I found myself at the altar watching her walk toward me. Alice was 5 feet 8 inches tall, with long blonde hair, piercing blue eyes, and a figure that could stop traffic. We got married, but by our 5th year, we were already on the brink of divorce. To this day, I still don't fully understand what went wrong. Perhaps Alice didn't either. On our way home from a trip, we stopped at Lambert's, a place famous for its flying rolls and mediocre food. Alice insisted we stop because it reminded her of her mother's cooking. As we settled in, she reached over and turned off the car sound system, signaling she wanted to have a serious talk. I discreetly turned on a recorder I kept in my jacket pocket, a habit I developed for moments like these. "James," she began, "have you ever thought about having an affair?" Her question hit me like a ton of bricks. My mind raced with questions. What prompted this? Was she hinting at something? I took a deep breath to clear my thoughts. "Alice, let's be honest," I said. "Everyone's thought about it. The real question is whether I've ever acted on it, and the answer is no." "Why not?" she pressed. "Because I took my vows seriously. When we got married, they meant something to me then, and they still do." Alice sighed. "Times have changed, James. Marriage vows don't hold the same weight they used to. I think you should consider finding a mistress, someone you're compatible with. Don't worry about guilt. I'm giving you my blessing. It might even strengthen our relationship." Her suggestion shocked me. It felt like she was giving me permission to betray her, something I couldn't fathom. "Why is my having an affair so important to you, Alice?" I asked. "Have I done something to make you want to sabotage our marriage?" She was silent for a long time. Finally, she turned the sound system back on, ending the conversation, but her silence spoke volumes. Alice always had an answer for everything, so her lack of response was telling. I started to believe that something was seriously wrong in our marriage, something I needed to uncover. We drove on in silence for another hour, covering about 40 miles, before she turned off the sound system again. I reached for my recorder. "I'm sorry, James," she said. "I think I've been reading too many romance novels. Those ideas must have come from there." With that, she turned the sound system back on, acting as if the matter was closed. But I knew better. Alice hated those books, always dismissing them as trashy. She would never read them, let alone let them influence her thoughts. As we drove the last leg home, I realized I knew very little about her Thursday nights out with the girls. I had always trusted her completely, never questioning her activities, but now I couldn't shake the suspicion that something wasn't right. Was she going out to bars and having one-night stands? When we arrived home, my parents were there with our kids. I poured drinks for my parents and listened as they recounted their weekend with the grandchildren. They cherished these moments, saying the kids kept them young and active. They stayed for about an hour before heading home, and I walked them to their car, my mind still reeling from the conversation with Alice. "James," my dad said quietly, "when would be a good time for us to have a private conversation at your office?" "Tomorrow." "I've got interviews all day," I replied. "How about we meet in 3 hours? Whatever's going on, I'm here for you." Dad leaned in, whispering, "It's not about your mom and me. It's about Alice and your youngest daughter. I can't say more since Alice is watching us." "Okay, Dad. I'll drop by after work and we'll sort it out in half an hour," I said loudly enough for Alice to hear through the window. After watching my parents drive away, I went inside, grabbed my car keys, and threw my toolbox into the trunk. "Hi, honey," I said. "I need to stop by Dad's tomorrow to help him with something, so I might be a little late." "I heard you from the window," Alice replied. "Don't worry, we can have dinner a bit later." The next day, my parents arrived promptly and were shown into my office. We settled down, waiting for the coffee to be brought in. Once it arrived, Emily closed the door behind her. "James," my father started, "I owe you an apology for that silly prank with the kids' DNA tests. They found a match for Megan. She has a paternal grandmother who's been searching for her son and his descendants." He handed me a form from Ancestry with the woman's name and phone number. I was stunned. Dad, seeing my reaction, understood how deeply the news had affected me. "Dad, I don't think this is a mistake," I said. "Let's see what we can figure out." Using the office phone, I dialed the number and activated the recording function. I wanted to make sure the conversation was documented. The phone rang twice before someone answered. "My name is James Taylor, and I am looking for Mrs. Margaret Brown regarding a DNA match found through Ancestry," I said. "May I speak to her, please?" "You're speaking to her?" the woman said. "How can I help you?" "It's complicated," I began. "In short, my youngest daughter is your granddaughter." "You mean Megan Taylor?" she asked. "Yes, that's right," I confirmed. "Then you might know my son, who I had to give up for adoption when I was 15, she said. "I might if I knew his name," I said. "He was adopted by a family named Johnson, and his middle name was Andrew," Mrs. Brown explained. My face went pale, and tears filled my parents' eyes because we knew the name all too well. "He's alive and well," I said. "He's now a district attorney in Cape Girardeau County, Missouri. He's also my wife's boss. He's never been married, and now I think I know why. Hez my only child," she said. "I have stage 4 lung cancer and don't have long to live. Would you allow your daughter Megan to visit me before I pass? If you can't afford it, I'll gladly pay for the ticket. I'd like to meet her and give her my inheritance. Mrs. Brown, given the circumstances, I'll let you make arrangements with my parents. Since you're only a state away, they can bring her for a special weekend visit so you can get to know her," I said. "I wouldn't let my daughter go on a trip like that alone. Is there anything else you need?" "Get me a notarized statement authorizing my attorney to conduct a DNA test," Mrs. Brown said. "Given the value of Megan's inheritance, he needs to confirm she is who we believe she is before altering my will." "Understood. I'll pass this on to my father," I said. "He can work out the details and get directions to you." I stood up, walked out of the office, and handed Emily my personal tape recorder. "Transcribe and notarize both my conversation and the phone call. I'll need them for the divorce proceedings." "Should I handle the DNA test authorization?" Emily asked, understanding that when the recorder was on, she should listen silently, a practice that had resolved many conflicts in the past. "Yes," I said, "but we need to keep this secret for a few weeks. I want to find out what my soon-to-be ex-wife does on Thursdays." I walked into my assistant's office and said, "David, I need to speak with you and your wife as soon as possible. I'm going to need your help with a personal matter." David immediately sensed the seriousness of my request. "She'll be off duty soon," he said. "I'll text her to come right over." I returned to my office and made plans. Using my house key, David and his wife would pack Megan's clothes and leave the following Friday. I would pick her up from school and drop her off at their place by 10. As I escorted my parents to the exit, David's wife arrived. I told her to head to his office and I would join them shortly. Thanks to modern technology, Emily had already transcribed the recordings. I handed copies to David and Anna to review, suggesting they start with the conversation between my wife and me. I gave Emily the paperwork my father had provided to make photocopies for my attorney's file, ensuring everything was in order. Both Anna and David had known Alice and me for many years, and they took today's revelations very hard. Anna and Alice grew up in the same neighborhood. Though they weren't close, they naturally knew everything about each other. Anna was shocked to uncover the hidden reality that had come to light. "Do you think there's any chance they're still lovers after all these years?" Anna asked. "Or was it one of those situations they got into and then realized their mistake?" "I don't know," I replied, "but I'm going to need your help to find out. For the next few weeks, David, I need you to take the company car for sales meetings. Anna, I'll need to drive your car so that no one will recognize it. You can use David's car. I'll inform corporate that this is part of your cross-training, David, so you'll have to do it for the next 3 months. You're going to follow Alice around on Thursday nights and document everything." David nodded. "Since Alice believes you're still making your weekly trips, she'll be none the wiser. My gut tells me it's still happening," I said. "Why else would Alice suddenly suggest I have an affair with her blessing? If Johnson hadn't changed jobs, nothing would have changed. I believe Alice may be planning to move in with Andrew Johnson when he starts working in St. Louis. If Alice can prove that I'm having an affair, it would justify her filing for divorce in her eyes." "I can see Alice doing something like that," Anna agreed. "It's become common to deflect blame onto others to distract from your own behavior. If you find proof one of these Thursday nights, call me. I'll have dispatch send a couple of officers to inform them you've been in an accident. That way we can get a detailed report on their state, clothed or otherwise, and where they end up. A few cops wouldn't mind finding a bit of revenge on the DA for how he's treated them." Emily looked up and said, "Paul Clark left the DA's office 4 months ago because he couldn't stand working for Johnson anymore. He opened his own practice. I've faxed everything we have so far to his office, and he's expecting you. You better hurry. Give Paul my regards and best wishes," Anna said. "Tell him we still miss him." I left to meet the man who was now on his way to the Supreme Court with the women's right-to-life movement. His perspective on the law and how to apply it had turned many cases upside down. As I approached Paul's office, things started to make sense. Alice and I began having marital issues right after she started working for Andrew Johnson, around the same time I was promoted to sales manager and had to start traveling frequently. If their affair had continued all these years, I'd been an unwitting cuckold for over 15 years. The expensive Christmas and birthday presents from Andrew now made sense. Paul was waiting for me when I arrived. Anna had briefed him on our plan. Paul handed me a key to Johnson's house and a paper with the alarm code. He also gave me a phone number. "Call this number," he said, "and you'll find people who can provide services at a reasonable price. I've spoken to them, and they're expecting your call." "Why are the codes only good until the end of next week?" I asked. "Johnson will get a monthly reminder to change his access codes," Paul explained. He was going to sue Johnson for child support from the day Megan was born. Under state law, he couldn't escape it by declaring bankruptcy. If Paul succeeded, Johnson would be financially ruined. He also planned to sue Alice for adultery, abandonment, and fraud for passing off Andrew Johnson's daughter as mine. Paul suggested temporarily transferring my parental rights to Megan to my parents until the court case was settled. "Why?" I asked. "That way they can't claim you're using Megan against them," Paul explained. "Johnson will fight dirty and sneaky, treating you the same way he treats everyone else. Sometimes the best offense is a strong defense." I offered to use my debit card to prepay for Paul's services, but he declined. "Your wife will see it right away, and guess what you're doing? Write me a check, and I'll hold on to it until the services are rendered." As I left Paul's office, it was clear he was giving me every advantage and time to figure things out. Emily had found the best possible help for me. I had the impression that Paul had personal reasons for going after Andrew Johnson so aggressively. Alice and Andrew were about to face consequences they never anticipated. Paul Clark had just created his own version of the divorce game. I signed the necessary paperwork for my parents to get temporary parental rights to Megan and explained the situation to them. They agreed it made sense. I was waiting for Anna to arrive in her 2002 Ford Taurus. David was going on his first sales trip, and Anna would leave her car at my place and take David home. My oldest daughter informed me that Alice wouldn't be home for dinner as she was going out with the girls right after work. When Anna arrived, we switched cars and I threw my suitcase in the trunk. "James," Anna said, "dispatch and all the guys are on board. Just let me know where." "Thanks," I said. Paul said to call him if things heat up so he can personally serve them. "I'd like to know why Paul wants Andrew Johnson out." "With Paul, it's a matter of principle," Anna replied. "Andrew can't back up what he says." It was interesting to watch Alice and Andrew drive away in their cars after both of them had finished a first-class steak at a bar and grill. They went their separate ways. I, however, drove straight to Andrew Johnson's house and waited. Paul's friends and my crew had already set up everything. I found a secure spot with a clear view of Andrew's place. Alice was the first to arrive. She disabled the alarm by entering a code and then used her key to unlock the door. We filmed her as she entered the house. 10 minutes later, Andrew arrived. Alice greeted him with her blouse wide open, revealing her bare chest. Andrew embraced her, and they shared a passionate kiss. As they kissed, I saw his hands move to her breasts. Once they closed the door, I stopped filming. 6 out of the 8 rooms in Andrew's house were wired for video and sound. We had set up our base in the house of Andrew's neighbor's son, who was serving a long prison sentence. Everything we filmed at Andrew's house was streamed live on their Facebook pages. It turned out that Alice had a team tailing me, thinking I would take the bait and look for a new mistress that night since she knew my schedule. They even hired a prostitute who matched my taste. I texted Anna to inform her of what I had overheard. She called her husband, David, to warn him he was being followed. David, a former Marine, took immediate action, driving his car off the road at 10 p.m. to force his followers to reveal themselves. He then called a tow truck and reported the incident to his wife, who texted me the details. I reassured her and provided the address. I slipped over to Andrew's house and removed the valves from all the tire rods on their cars, ensuring they wouldn't be able to leave. The lovers were trapped. Police officers arrived, their blue lights flashing, and began looking for Alice Taylor. Andrew tried to deny her presence until the officers pointed out her car in the driveway. Finally, Alice appeared, wrapped in a sheet. "Mrs. Alice Taylor," an officer said, "your husband, James Taylor's car was involved in an accident near Little Rock, Arkansas. Your parents suggested we find you here." I savored the sight of Alice's face turning white. The police lied to unsettle them. Afterward, the officers left, and I followed, keeping up with them from the moment the police arrived to the moment they left. Everything was streamed live on Facebook, providing undeniable proof. At midnight, my eldest daughter, Grace, called. "Daddy, Mom isn't home yet, and my calls go to her answering machine. I'm worried. She never stays out this late. What should I do?" "Call Andrew Johnson and ask him to put you through to your mother," I instructed, giving her his number. "Why call her boss?" Grace asked. "Because he's been her boyfriend every Thursday for the past 16 years, I replied. I then sent Grace a clip showing Alice wrapped in a sheet, talking to the cops, and Andrew in pajama pants. 10 minutes later, Grace called back. Mom's phone suddenly worked. She called me saying she was on Lower East Broadway with 4 flat tires. I knew she was lying and told her it couldn't be true since it was right next to Andrew's house. She insisted, but I told her I saw the video of her and her lover. When she asked for the clip, I sent it to her. Mom couldn't explain why she was wearing a sheet. I wasn't expecting her home for a few hours, but "Can you do me a favor and open the front door?" I asked as I got out of the car. Grace saw me take my suitcase from the trunk and walk toward her. As soon as I set my suitcase down, my cell phone rang. It was Paul Clark. I answered and put it on speaker. "James, I just served them both at his house," Paul said. "Now your wife and her lover are barred from coming within 500 feet of you and your children. I'll notify the Cape Police Department before heading home. Don't talk to her at all. If she shows up, even for her clothes, call the police." "Got it. And my eldest daughter heard it too," I said. "Thanks, Paul. Grace, open the garage so I can move Anna's car inside. I told her I need to be in Little Rock." As we finished, Grace asked, "Is that why the locksmith came at 6 to change the locks?" "Yes. It was a last-minute decision," I explained. "I had Kathy order it since it was becoming clear things would go as planned." "What prompted this?" Grace asked. "The DNA test your grandfather sent to Ancestry. They matched with Megan. He told me about it at work on Monday. When I contacted the woman, it turned out your mother's boss is her son, whom she gave up for adoption when she was 15. Grace lost her temper, and I held her until she calmed down. Then we went into the kitchen to talk quietly. I played a recording of a conversation her mother and I had on our drive back from Nashville. Hearing her mother's words was revealing. "Why does Mom want you to have an affair, Dad?" Grace asked. "To offset the consequences of her actions if they were discovered," I said. "It's ironic that her assumption led to the truth." A quiet knock interrupted us. "Since I wasn't supposed to be home," Grace answered. "A police officer informed us they had stopped the cab Alice was in and warned her about violating a court order. Grace and I discussed everything late into the night, agreeing that Alice should have been a writer, given her flair for storytelling." "I still can't believe Mom had an affair with the same man for over 16 years, Grace said, her voice tinged with disbelief. "How did we not see that?" "It was easy," I replied. "You kids were young, and I was a sales manager who traveled to different states for meetings every week. Out of trust in our marriage, I saw no reason not to give your mom my blessing for her weekly girls' night out." "We all trusted her," Grace said. "That's what blinded us to what was really happening." I sat there stunned. If my daughter hadn't pointed it out, I never would have realized it. Alice had used our trust in her as a shield to continue her affair without consequence. Grace saw the tears welling in my eyes and said, "That's what hurts the most. It's not the cheating or the lying. It's the fact that she used our trust and beliefs about her to keep the only relationship that mattered to her going. If your mother could do that to someone she claimed to love," I said, "imagine what she'll do to us now that she hates us for exposing her." Grace got up to make us both a fresh cup of coffee. Dawn was already breaking when a text notification came through on my phone. "It's from your mom," I said. "She wants to talk to me as soon as possible, saying we have family issues to discuss before I return from my trip." "How are you going to respond?" Grace asked, worry evident in her voice. "Don't worry," I said. "I'll tell her to go ahead and laugh at the big dumbass behind my back with Andrew. She can still move to St. Louis with him, but not with our kids." Grace looked at me, shocked. "Your mother doesn't need me anymore," I explained. "My usefulness to her has run out. She wanted me to have an affair so she could use it against me in divorce court. She never thought she'd get caught after all this time." It must have been painful for Grace to hear the harsh truth in my words. Few people can face the raw reality without reacting defensively. Most lash out, calling the truth-teller names because the truth hurts, but in time, they accept it. I stood up and took my daughter in my arms as she began to cry again. We managed to calm down before we heard Michael and Megan stirring. I turned on the kitchen TV for the local morning news, as I always did. Soon they were having breakfast, surprised to see me at home. We were all taken aback when an image of my wife appeared on the screen. My son turned up the volume, curious. I felt a pang of pity for my children as they heard Andrew and Alice discussing how stupid I was. Alice bluntly said, "That fool is such a he doesn't notice anything going on around him." Then their mother made a sarcastic remark about me, making them both laugh. The reporter cut in saying, "I don't think they're laughing anymore." He explained that after watching 5 hours of the longtime lovers' Facebook behavior live, their plan to set James Taylor up with a prostitute to secure a divorce and take everything he had backfired spectacularly. In the next scene, Paul was shown suing both of them. Megan ran over to me and sat on my lap, sobbing. It was a terrible way for a 16-year-old to learn that her father wasn't her biological father, but her mother's longtime lover. Michael summed it up bluntly. "If you're just a piece of trash in Mom's eyes, what does that make the rest of us?" Once Megan calmed down, Grace helped me explain what had happened since we got back from Nashville. I called the school to arrange for them to be excused on Friday and Monday to give them time to adjust. Just as we were about to start breakfast, Megan said, "Daddy, the chief of police is coming." That got our attention, and we turned up the volume again. It was announced that both Alice Taylor and Andrew Johnson, our current district attorney, were being criminally prosecuted. A task force was being assembled to investigate. I thought about how public exposure often forces people to confront behaviors they tolerate privately. Hypocrisy rules our society every day. After breakfast and cleaning up, I gathered my 3 children at the table. I showed each of them a copy of the letter my father had received. Then I said, "Megan, my parents are picking you up to take you to meet your biological father's mother. She is dying of cancer and has asked to meet you. There's a good reason for this, but it's best if she explains it to you. As far as I'm concerned, you are my daughter and always will be. If you have any questions, ask your grandparents." "Grace, will you help your sister pack for the weekend while I call my parents?" I asked. As soon as the girls left, my son asked, "How do you handle this, Daddy?" "I don't know," I replied. I find myself constantly struggling to keep my cool. "Remember, son, if this ever happens to you as a father, you have to stay strong for everyone else in your life." With those words, I called my parents and explained the situation. They said they'd come as soon as they finished loading the car, since they still had an hour before their flight. Little did I know that my relationship with my son would change for the better at that moment. The 3 of us watched the daughter I had raised leave with my parents to meet her biological grandmother for the first time. I prayed that everything would go smoothly and that she would return with the same love she always had. "James," he said, "Lila is in the house, so you can have some privacy. Well, keep them away until you calm down." He stayed with me until things settled. "Lila and I plan to change our will," he said. "What should have been Alice's will be divided among your 3 children. She may be our daughter, but I'll never forgive her for what she's become." We had just finished clearing out the house when my dad called. "Megan met this lady," my father said. "You can definitely see the family resemblance." Their meeting went well. Mrs. Brown was interested in our family situation and got Megan to openly express her feelings, which was good since she had been keeping things to herself. The lawyer got the blood sample he needed and then invited me in for a private conversation. My father continued, He asked about Andrew Johnson, and I told him what we knew. I learned that Andrew's real father is in prison for life for killing his mistress's husband. Andrew would have inherited from his real mother if Megan hadn't come into her life. "Don't worry, Dad," I replied. Paul Clark got a court order banning Andrew from being within 500 feet of us. It was a busy day with many family members from both sides offering support. We stayed at Mrs. Brown's estate as her guests. "Your mother felt honored to be treated so regally," Dad explained. "Megan is staying with Mrs. Brown now. We both like her. Her lawyer said he hadn't seen a smile on the grand old lady's face in a long time." "Hold on, I'll put your mom on the phone." "James, I got a chance to talk to Margaret alone. She asked what kind of son you were, and I spoke about your life, trying to be as honest as I could. We discussed in great detail what had happened over the past week. She appreciated the respect you showed her and thanked us for advising her on handling her estate situation," my mom continued. "She plans to leave everything in a trust in Megan's name for you to manage until she turns 25. Text me when you leave so I can be there when you bring her home," I said before hanging up. I texted Megan, "We all miss you," and sent a quick message to Dad. We finally had time to get everything in order before David and Anna arrived in my car. I apologized to Anna for not returning it sooner. "The police chief sees a chance to take down Andrew Johnson," Anna said. "He and Paul are collaborating, and Paul has provided some questionable items for the investigators." When I got back, the staff looked gloomy and upset. David said, "I told them in general terms that some of us were aware of what was happening most of the week and helped where we could. It's been an emotional roller coaster since Thursday night. The kids are still struggling, so I'm taking Monday off too," I said. "Have you heard anything about Alice?" Anna asked. "Not since Thursday night," I replied. "Andrew and she are probably busy with their own lives, making it clear how they feel about us." My youngest daughter called me early Sunday morning and asked if she and her grandparents could come home late on Monday. I gave my blessing if her grandparents agreed. She thanked me for making her go. "Why?" I asked. "Mrs. Brown made me realize it wasn't my fault that Mom's infidelity brought me into the world," Megan said. "She made Daddy understand that we were all innocent victims and didn't deserve what Mom and Andrew's behavior brought upon us. I love you, Daddy," she said before ending the call. On Monday night, Grace, Michael, and I watched as my parents pulled into our driveway. They looked stressed and tired. As soon as Megan got out of the car, she rushed into my arms. It was nice to have my youngest daughter home. Her father opened the trunk and brought in her suitcase, which Michael immediately carried to her bedroom. Then the three of them went to the family room to catch up while my parents and I went to the kitchen for fresh coffee. My parents shared their impressions of Mrs. Margaret Brown. "When we left, she was calm," my father said. "Meeting Megan and having her accept Mrs. Brown was important to her. Mom pulled an envelope of legal documents out of her purse and handed it to me. This was given to me by her lawyer per Margaret's instructions," she explained. I opened it and found a check for $50,000 and a short letter. The great lady thanked me for granting her request and informed me that she had already lived beyond her life expectancy before I contacted her. The DNA confirmed the biological connection. "Megan is a beautiful girl and you've raised her well. Use the resources I've given you to get through this difficult time and don't forget your values." I gave it to my parents to read. It was hard to realize that we may have fulfilled a dying woman's request. Over a cup of coffee, I explained everything that had happened while they were on the trip. I told them that emotionally everything was behind us as a family and that we would return to our normal lives starting tomorrow. The rest of the week went smoothly. Alice tried to contact each of our children by phone and was told not to call again. Corporate headquarters was thrilled that I was no longer leading sales meetings and began looking for a new sales manager. For the first time in 10 years, I was sitting in my office going over the month's sales figures when Emily poked her head through the door saying, "It hit the fan." I looked up and asked, "What now?" "I received a letter informing me that your latest letter to Alice was published on a Southeast Missouri newspaper website," Emily said. I went to the website and found the Speak Out section. Emily came over to my desk and started reading over my shoulder. By the time she finished, she was sobbing. "I wrote it when I was emotionally upset," I explained. "Maybe I was too harsh." "No," Emily said. "You just coldly and bluntly stated what her long-term behavior shows. Either one of them could have come clean. Andrew got the benefit of a long-term relationship without the cost. That's what I thought, I said. It's rare for the community to see the real cost of someone's behavior on a family in such a public way. For anyone who has been divorced like me, it's a stark reminder of the pain and suffering they went through before they could start living again. Look at that last comment. As a feminist for most of my life, I have fought for equality and empowerment. What this woman and her lover did to her husband and children has forever tarnished our movement. I read aloud. Alice and Andrew were having dinner at a bar and grill. The place is usually packed on Friday nights, but tonight there were only empty tables around them. When they asked the waitress why, she explained that people were avoiding them because of the publication of James's letter on the website. Alice and Andrew asked for the bill and quickly left, knowing they had better stay out of the public eye for a while. As they were leaving, Alice noticed her parents sitting at a table. She approached them with Andrew following. Her father looked at them and said, "Mr. Johnson, I suggest you leave and let my wife and I eat in peace." Alice left the restaurant in tears, finally realizing the irreversible consequences of her and Andrew's actions. When they got back to Andrew's place, they went to the website and saw for themselves what was being written in the comments. It was clear to both of them that the public despised them. 3 months later, I sat in the passenger seat of my car watching Megan drive. We were on our way to Wichita, Kansas, after learning that her grandmother Margaret had passed away. We were heading to the airport to take the private jet provided by the estate. Megan was struggling with the loss, having grown close to Margaret through constant phone calls. When she returned from her trip, Grace and Michael were a great help, and the four of us became closer. They both encouraged me to start dating, but I remained quiet about it, feeling once burned, twice embarrassed. Andrew and Alice had moved to St. Louis, where the feds authorized Andrew to start work early. The county was glad to be rid of him, provided he repaid over $45,000 in questionable expenses. They now lived in a rented 2-bedroom apartment, preparing for possible bankruptcy due to the impending civil suit. Under Missouri bankruptcy laws, they could only keep $10,000 each. Our divorce was finalized according to state law, with Alice required to pay child support while the kids were in school and cover 50% of their living expenses if they lived on campus. The civil fraud trial was due in 2 weeks. My children still refused to talk to their mother, as did her relatives. Alice had learned firsthand that people can only tolerate so much before they leave for good. Megan had to endure a meeting with her biological father arranged by the state child welfare agency. It did not go well for him. Megan told him that his mother had informed her that he, like his real father, was a drug addict who should not be allowed near any woman. In front of welfare officials, Megan declared both her mother and him dead in her eyes. We attended her grandmother's funeral, after which the lawyer revealed the extent of Megan's inheritance. It was overwhelming. As trustee, I discussed it with Megan, and we decided to sell her grandmother's house, keeping only personal jewelry and a few photographs. Back home, as the school year wound down, I prepared for the first day of court. On Wednesday, Megan walked into the den. "Dad, can you arrange for Andrew, Mom, and their lawyers to meet with us and Paul on Tuesday?" she asked. "I think so, but why?" I inquired. "I want them to see the real cost of their actions," Megan replied. "Grandma Margaret suggested it." I called Paul, and we arranged the meeting. It was a beautiful sunny day as we sat with Andrew, Alice, and their attorneys. Megan spoke first. "I requested this meeting," she began, "to inform my biological father of the following the whereabouts of your father and his request to visit him in prison. He is serving a life sentence for the murder of his mistress's husband. You must realize that you are the product of a rape committed by a distant cousin when she was 14 years old." Megan handed him a sealed envelope with his name on it. I savored the shocked expressions on Andrew and Alice's faces. "You both should know that my biological grandmother left me over $100 million in trust for my father, James Taylor, until I turned 25. "It would have been yours, Andrew, if she hadn't discovered me," Megan stated. "When she found out how I was conceived and what came of it, her views on morals and standards changed. That's when she disinherited you. In my grandmother's eyes, what you both did was disgusting. Paul, my trust will be paying my father's legal bills. Mark and Mom, you can try to reconcile before you go to court, because if we have to, we'll go all the way to the Supreme Court. Mom, You have to realize that even though you created me in sin, that doesn't give you the right to deem it acceptable. Thankfully, my biological grandmother made me realize that it is my father's morals, principles, and standards that make me who I am. I left that meeting both proud and humbled. My daughter had said it all. Whatever happened tomorrow didn't matter, because today I was blessed with what truly mattered.